So I would like to now open the Sherborn Select Board meeting of May 30th, 2024. And starting with the executive session at 6:30 p.m. And if the Assistant Town Administrator could read the executive session agenda, please.
Good evening. Item number 1 is meeting with Town Council in executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, 3, and Suffolk Construction versus DCAM 449, Mass 444, 2007, to discuss Phoenix Partners Greenwood Street Development, LLC versus the Sherborn Zoning Board of Appeals, Mass Housing Appeals Committee number 2024-03, and pursuant to General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements, specifically the Public Records Law, General Law, Chapter 4, Section 726, discuss privileged communications from Town Council regarding litigation. Item number 2 is meeting with Town Council in executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A, 3, and Suffolk Construction versus DCAM 449, Mass 444, 2007, to discuss 31 Hunting Lane, 41 North Main Street, Igor Lebowski et al. Versus the Town of Sherborn, Land Court number 21, miscellaneous PS 000139, HPS, and 31 Hunting Lane, LLC versus the Sherborn Board of Appeals, Housing Appeals Committee number 2021-05, and 41 North Main Street, LLC versus the Sherborn Board of Appeals, Housing Appeals Committee number 2021-06, pursuant to General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant aid requirements, specifically the Public Records Law, General Law, Chapter 4, Section 72, parentheses 26, to discuss privileged communication from Town Council regarding litigation. Item number 3 is meeting with Town Council in executive session pursuant to General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A, 3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation, Hudson Walker versus Sherborn Planning Board, Land Court 23, miscellaneous 000398, and pursuant to General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant, aid, and requirements, specifically the Public Records Law, General Law, Chapter 4, Section 7, parentheses 26, discuss privileged communications from Town Council.
These executive session items are a mouthful, aren't they?
Yeah, it was.
Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as read?
So moved.
All right. In favor, Stephen?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Marion?
Aye.
I am aye as well. So now I do declare that we need to discuss these 3 items in executive session. So I move that we enter executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, Stephen?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye, with a question. We're doing all 3 executive sessions in this motion.
We are, yes. We're just going into executive session to cover this executive session agenda. Yep.
Okay, yes.
All right. All in favor, Stephen?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Marion?
Aye.
And I am aye as well. So, Jeremy, could you please turn the recording off now? Got the recording going. Thank you, Jeremy. I would like to now open the open session portion of this select board meeting on May 30th, 2024. And I'd like to have the Assistant Town Administrator please read the open session agenda.
Good evening. After I read the agenda, the select board can vote to amend or approve the agenda as presented. For public comment tonight, we have David Colleen from the Town Forest Committee that has something to update the select board on. Items may be taken out of order and topics not anticipated 48 hours in advance may be added. Item number 1 is the Regional School Committee excess and deficiency use. Jeremy Marset will speak on that. Item number 2 is the consent agenda, which is the town administrator payroll warrant. Item 3 is select board reports, and item 4 is the town administrator reports. North Sherborn Water Sewer District update, Washington Maple construction update, and staffing updates.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane. Are there any adjustments or amendments to the agenda as read? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Stephen,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Marion,
Aye.
and I'm as well. So, Mr. Colleen, Dave, you want to give us your update or your announcement, please? I think you need to unmute yourself first, though.
That's better, I suppose.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we had to cancel the meeting last night and we're gonna have it on next Wednesday, June 5th, 5 o'clock. At the town hall. We have a couple of things, the Pine Hill Bicycle Trail extension. That's been in the planning for a couple of years. The Forest and Trails brought this up to the town forest, and we're gonna open discussion on that next week. Some questions for logging and any other business. And one other thing that we're going to announce to the DCR has selected the town forest work on Hunting Lane area to have a forum. They're bringing in I guess about 10 loggers to see the operation, because they DCR is very excited on what a good job we've been doing up there. So Monday at noontime, there'll be opening. DCR will be there. Our expert logger will be there, the forester, and so that's what's going on with town forest right now.
All right. Thank you very much.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead, Paul.
I think most folks don't understand that with forests, you need to manage them. They need some regular management for the forest to thrive. Otherwise, they will get overcrowded, and the overcrowding will have adverse effects on the plant growth and on the tree growth. There's been some questions asked me about why are we doing this? Why aren't we just leaving these things alone? Good management, and perhaps Dave can speak more to this, but good management requires that you actually go into the forest and do some thinning. Dave, can you explain why are you doing management so the voters who had those concerns can understand what's going on?
Yes, Paul. We talked to a DCR who was basically in charge of all the forests in the state, and they look over forests all the time. And I got with their forester, and he walked. Steve Petty and I walked through that whole forest, and he said it's time to thin it because there's too many trees, and the growth is getting stunted. So you need to open it up. And so we brought in a forester who did a plan, and it has to be approved by the state. And they looked it all over and they approved it. And we're in the process of doing it right now.
Thank you. Thank you for the members of your committee and yourself for taking care of our forests and making sure that they're thriving.
Thank you.
Marion.
Yes, I just have a question for Dave. That session with the loggers on
Yeah.
Monday, who is invited to be there? Is it just the town forest committee and the
No,
loggers?
anybody can come in. It's open, but basically it was set up for the foresters. And then Mike said, I'm sorry, Mike from DCR said, invite anybody you want to listen, and walk the woods if you want and see, ask questions of DCR and our forester, Phil Benjamin, who has done a lot of work on town properties, conservation, town forest. It's open so people can go in and ask them questions. Of the why and wherefore.
Where will it begin?
It's gonna begin at the big, huge parking lot at Hunting Lane, the temporary one for the trucks to show up. And again, you come in there, Sean will be there, and Steve Petty and I will be there, and we can explain what the new parking lot is going to look like when it's all done. And I was explaining to Jeremy, we're in the process of getting the plan done. So we can go before the planning board.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions for Dave? All right, before we go to the first agenda item, Dan, do you want to open your meeting before we do that?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That would be great. So we're going to open the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting of May 30th, 2024. It's 7:37. We're just here attending the select board meeting, so our agenda is their agenda. In particular, the first item on the regional schools and E&D. And let me just do a quick roll call to make sure everybody's good with that. So Nora, let me start with you.
Here.
Yes, in favor of proceeding, as I said. Yeah, thanks. Penn?
Yes, in favor.
Mike W?
Yes, in favor.
Thanks, Mike Winters. Mike Flanagan?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes, in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. So we are all set. Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, so Jeremy, you're going to kick us off on the first item, which is the capital projects and excess deficiency use to the regional schools.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. So this was an item that I'd noted at your last meeting under the town administrator reports, and it was requested that it come back to be its own agenda item at your next meeting. So we're bringing this back as an agenda item for your meeting. If you recall, it was noted in the update, the regional school committee at their May 7th meeting approved the use of $655,000 of excess and deficiency funds to cover the cost of high school rooftop unit project. They also approved the reallocation of $350,000 of capital funding, the original source being E&D, from the high school boiler project to also the high school rooftop unit project. In the select board's agenda packet and also the packet posted online, provided some information to give some more context. There are two memos included in your packet that were prepared by school finance and presented to the regional school committee on their operating budget and excess and deficiency forecasts, and also a memo specifically on the capital projects just noted in the use of E&D. Also included the most recent E&D calculation and certification that the town receives annually from the Department of Local Services. There's also a history of the E&D balance from, I believe, 2009 to current. And also there's a section on Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 16B.5, also included, which outlines the use, allowed use, or what would happen if there is a excess excess E&D funds. And also in your packet is 603 CMR 4106, which is the Code of Massachusetts regulations on excess deficiency funds.
Yeah, that's great. And I missed the last meeting, but my understanding, because we've been at this for a while, this was actually a fiscal year, I want to say 22 capital budget item originally, and they didn't end up doing the project. And I think Heidi at that time was our treasurer, and so we didn't borrow the money because they weren't going to do the project. They got deferred, I think, by 2 years. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the scope and costs have both changed due to that. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. The
Okay.
original project did have, an agreement, and there was some borrowed funds from both communities to fund the rooftop unit project.
Right.
This reallocation of E&D funds or commitment of E&D funds appears to be, an increase in the cost of the project.
Yep. And Dan, did you want to add anything to that factually, or?
Thanks, Jeff. I was just gonna offer that my understanding is that exactly as you said, that boiler project was on the school's capital plan as presented to the towns. And at a certain point, they decided to fund it with E&D. So they allocated the $350,000 of E&D and transferred it to their capital account. And then subsequently learned that the project didn't need to be done for a good number of years. And so the funds remained in that capital account, hence the 350,000 reallocation from the capital account towards this project, that we're talking about.
Yep.
Just
Okay.
adding a little color. Thanks.
No, I appreciate it. And Paul, you want to add?
Yeah, a couple of comments, because I was one of those that questioned this. I questioned it because when we do projects for the region, we sign these intermunicipal agreements, and every one of the agreements have the following language. Upon completion of the project, any funds contributed by the member towns and not expended to pay costs of the project shall be returned to the member town in accordance with the same proportion that each member town contributed to the project's total cost. All funds that are not required to complete the project shall be returned to the member towns on or before the last day of the fiscal year in which the project is completed. So having that in mind and hearing that the 350 was moving from the boiler project to the rooftop project, the question or the hypothesis that I was concerned with was that they were taking funds that were in an IMA, which should have gone to the town, and applying it to this project. But what I've heard right now from Jeremy and from Dan is that those boiler projects were never in an IMA. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, so that essentially answers the question that I raised. It's just that over the years, sometimes the origin of funds gets lost in the presentation of all the details. And unless you know the origin, you don't know whether it reverts to us or not. But it would be a moot point anyway, because they need more money to complete the rooftop project. And if that's the case, they're going to come looking for more money, presumably from somewhere. And if they didn't have the 350, we may have to enter into a new IMA to give them the 350 if they don't use E&D funds. So we probably would get to the same result, which is that they should use the funds that they have. But I had that question
Yeah, I think
about
that's
whether or not there was a vote or a consultation with us to make sure that it was okay with us to divert funds from an IMA returned to this new project. But I think that's been answered, that
Yeah, I think
it's,
you phrased it well, but I think it doesn't apply. And the thing here too is the reason this project has changed in scope, in addition to cost increases over time, is that they're now making a more sustainable project and making the heat source be air source heat pumps, not a heating source. And so they're getting off natural gas and going to a much more sustainable energy source. So the scope of the project is larger, but it also is probably going to mean significant energy savings costs as well as sustainability benefits. And we'll also get, I believe, some grant money from Eversource and possibly leads for doing more sustainable design. So that there'll be, I'm not sure if it's shown in the project economics yet, but there'll be energy savings and grant savings that will be operating cost benefits to the town of doing this project in a different way.
so if I could just respond to that, based on the information that you provided, the information in the packet, the information I heard from Jeremy and from Dan, I withdraw any objection that might have been attributed to me by my questioning this project 2 meetings ago. And I'm happy to see it go forward.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Stephen.
Right. I have one question, and then I've got a few comments, I guess, to hopefully, start the actual discussion. One is, Jeremy, was anybody from the region invited to this meeting, either from the school administration or regional school committees?
I didn't reach out specifically to invite them to this meeting, thinking that it would be a discussion of the select board.
Okay. So the way that I see it, and I know that there are some members of the public here, and then certainly advisories here. I think a lot of people who see that the region has suddenly decided to allocate $1 million of their money towards this project, entirely outside of the purview of any of the town boards, committees, advisory, or otherwise. And understandably that is, upsetting, and feels like they are skirting some appropriate review. Ultimately, though, what they've done is they've used money from excess and deficiency, which we in the town can view as somewhat serving a similar function to free cash. But at the end of the day, the region is its own legal entity with its own budget, and the excess and deficiency as defined is entirely within their right to use however they want. Essentially, the town does not have say over how the region uses excess and deficiency. And because they are using essentially all E&D money to cover this $1 million, they are within their right. I would actually argue that, in fact, this is the type of thing that E&D is meant for. A project overrun, and you don't want to just kill the project and have to wait till the next town meeting to deal with it. So you use E&D. But what it does bring to light is kind of the overall sort of management and usage of E&D. Essentially, the fact that they had all of this excess money that they could put towards it, the $350,000. And, one, I guess there is also the question of how is it that there was such a huge disparity between the presented need for new boilers and the actual need, such that, oh no, actually we don't need this $350,000 for many, many years, right? That's a little bit problematic, but I think that's a side issue. To me, it's really more of a policy issue that actually probably is more for the advisory committee to discuss and recommend on, as to how does the town want the school to utilize E&D moving forward. And I remember that actually when I was on advisory, there was one year when the schools decided to use a bunch of their E&D, which I think would otherwise have put them over the 5% threshold. They decided to instead put it towards several very large capital projects. And at the time, and as is common, the town's budget situation was tight, and I think that we were immediately appreciative of their removing a capital item from our plan. And so it seemed like a win-win situation. But I think after a little bit of kind of thinking about it and looking into it, we realized that this is a way where the school is essentially taking capital projects out of the purview of the town's capital budget committee, advisory committee, select board, and town meeting, because they're paying for it with E&D. When at the end of the day, this extra money that is above the 5% threshold should be returned to the town, and it should be coming back to our general funds so that we can use it as we see fit, because ultimately their budget comes from the assessment that they levy to each of the towns. And so if they're over by millions of dollars, such that their E&D is beyond 5%, that's all money that the towns were overtaxed, right? And appropriately, that money should be returned to the town to be used as we see fit. As you know, Jeff, I think you like to make the comment that, when you have a big capital project, it makes more sense to pay for it with borrowing so that the cost of that project is amortized over the life of the project, right? So you have a roof and it's going to last you 20, 30 years. Well, then the town should be paying for that gradually over the next 20 or 30 years. When you just dump a whole bunch of E&D into it, essentially what's happened is now this money, which should be coming back to the town for immediate tax relief, is instead being held at, by the region. And I don't think that this is a good policy from the town's perspective. Financially, it is not a good policy, I think, for the schools to continue using E&D for large capital projects. And I think that's to me, that's the main topic of discussion regarding what's going on here.
Well, I guess the only area I disagree with you about is that this isn't like a new capital project that they used excess and deficient fund. This is a change in scope of a project that Sherborn and Dover already approved. And part of the scope increase was due to making the project much more sustainable by using air source heat pumps, which added to the cost. And they also deferred the project for 2 years for, I don't know all the reasons, but I think one of them is because it's hard to get contractors these days. It's not just, so this is a project that we as a town and advisory board approved 2 years ago. Just the
Yeah,
cost.
I agree with you, Jeff.
Not
And I'm
another
not,
project that they decided to fund on their own. It's one in which the scope changed.
yeah, and I'm not saying that there is something wrong with this particular rooftop project,
Yeah,
or in fact how they are handling the current situation. I think
yeah.
that how they are handling the current situation is more or less appropriate. I think, to me, the bigger issue is that $350,000 and how that came to happen, and how it came to be that they had this extra $350,000 that they could throw at it. And I'm pretty sure that it was that particular boiler project. It may have been one of several that, whenever it was that came up a couple of years ago, right? I was the advisory chair, and at the joint committee meeting, I requested that the region not pay for it with E&D, and that instead they levy it to the towns. Each town could decide how we wanted to pay for it. We probably would have borrowed, and Dover probably would have used free cash. And then they could turn that money over to the towns so that we could use it for tax relief. But they declined, which is their right, because they're a separate legal entity. And we didn't get a lot of support from Dover for that request, and so obviously we were going to lose it. But I think that now is a time to kind of, I guess, revisit policy moving forward, and what we think is in the best financial interest of the town for how we should request the school use their E&D and how they fund their capital projects.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you want to sort of reorient us here, Dan, a little bit, and sort of summarize kind of the arguments being made?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Just to build on comments that others have made. So, I think advisory will have a meeting next week to talk more about this, and I suspect we shall see, but I think the outcome of that meeting probably will be a letter that advisory will want to send to the regional school committee, picking up on some of these policy issues raised by this. as Jeremy and others have pointed out, no issues at all with, whether the school committee did anything inappropriate, completely in their purview to do this. Completely appropriate for them to use E&D as they choose, although I think there is a policy issue there. But I think there are a few lessons that I've taken from this, and I haven't circulated it, but will over the weekend circulate, a draft of a letter that highlights some of the lessons that I think we might take from it, and some of the ways that we might want to, advisory might want to encourage the regional school committee to proceed just a little bit differently. One is on budget process, which is their current approach is if a project is to be funded by the towns, it appears on their capital plan. If they choose to fund a project with E&D, it disappears from the capital plan. And that makes it very challenging to track projects like this boiler project and to know sort of what happened to it and what happened to the financing. So I think we would hope and ask the schools to do a capital plan that includes every capital project they're doing, and then indicate the financing, whether it's from the towns, whether it's borrowing that the region would do, or whether it's E&D, and then have those projects remain on the plan until they're completed. And I think that would help with the boiler project that kind of appeared and then disappeared and became a little bit hard to track. I think there's also concern that I have, and I think others on advisory, about timely communication of changes in capital projects. So in this case, I think towards the end of March, before town meeting, well before town meeting, my understanding is the school committee had a pretty good idea of the numbers. And while I got an indication from folks that there were going to be cost overruns, I didn't have a sense of the magnitude. And picking up on a point Steve made, I think if it had been clear that there was a 800,000 gap to fill, perhaps the preference of the towns would have been for the region to borrow for that, again, to spread it out over the cost out over the next 20 years, or maybe to do an IMA and for 400 for Sherborn share of it, $400,000. I don't know what the town would have decided, but arguably might have decided to want to borrow for that rather than paying for it all at once using E&D. So I think we'd want to pitch them on just requesting that as soon as they get information like that, it gets passed on to the towns. And then the final point being really the point Steve raised, and this is just a policy, I think, disagreement with the schools, where this spring in advisory conversations with the school committee, we spent a lot of time talking about E&D and suggesting that they could target a lower level of E&D and still have plenty of cushion to deal with contingencies. And that by having a level of E&D that always comes in just a little bit below the cap, at which point they'd have to return it to the towns if E&D ran over 5% of the budget, that they could quite safely target a lower level of E&D and essentially have a smaller assessment to the towns. So I think that you'll hear some different things from others on advisory. I think that the reason for our meeting is so that we can talk about it and see if there is a consensus on some lessons that we might draw from this and send a letter to the school committee. But that is a little bit of background on the thinking of advisory around those issues. And just final thing, again, to pick up on the point about the 350,000 that landed in that capital account, effectively, because that was funds that were excess funds not needing to be used, effectively that it's as if that account was E&D plus or E&D supplement, but not called E&D. And if it had been called E&D and had been part of E&D, then perhaps there would have been more of an inclination for the school committee to return some of those funds to the town and lower assessments, lower tax rates. So that's a little bit of the advisory thinking. I think next Wednesday evening we'll have a meeting. We'll talk about it. We'll see if there's agreement on the letter. I've reached out to Dover Warrant to see if they feel similarly, but that's still under discussion. So we'll see where that goes next week. So thanks for listening to my my spiel on that. But that's my take. And again, I think you'll hear some different things from some different folks on advisory.
Yeah, no, I think that was a good summary. Although my suggestion is, what about if you invited them to your meeting next week? Because we usually, as you do, I think too, have a sometime in February, March timeframe, have a joint meeting with Dover Warrant to discuss regional schools. Would it be wise to maybe just ask if they would like to have a meeting concurrently with you and post a meeting for next week?
To invite Dover Warrant.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
it might supplement and then maybe help encourage them to, contribute to the letter and maybe sign the letter.
That's a good idea. I hadn't raised that with them, but I will do that tomorrow morning.
You could raise it with your team too, but I think it might be a way to make it be more collaborative, and in a way that would be maybe more effective with the regional schools if it was a joint.
As Steve mentioned, the Dover Warrant and Sherborn Advisory haven't always seen eye to eye on issues around the schools. But I would be very enthusiastic about trying to see if there is some common ground here. It would be very helpful.
Yeah, we didn't see pocketbook to pocket, but they used to have 6 million in free cash in Dover also. So we didn't see pocketbook to pocketbook very often either. Thank you. Mike.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. I just have a couple comments, and I guess first, I just want on Dan's last comment there about the 350. If it was an E&D, they have more of an inclination to give it back. In fact, they'd have an obligation because it would mean they're over 5%. If you put the 350 back in the $1.1 million, we'd actually be over 5% E&D, so they'd be required to give it back. But because it was in this other account, it wasn't. So I agree we would likely end up at the same point, whether this was E&D or it went through the capital budget process. But I think what we're missing the point is that this happened less than 15 days after everyone got together and voted on these things. And from my standpoint, and I think maybe others here who spent 6 months asking fire department about equipment and police cars, it's quite discouraging that 15 days after town meeting, 30% of the capital budget increased 30%. And this information was presumably known before the town meeting. And so could have been brought forward like everything else. And so I'm going forward, it happened going forward. I think the question we ask is how do we prevent this going forward? And I think this is exhibit A of why the E&D balance on a running basis should just be significantly lower than what it currently is. The 5% is the limit. The 3% minimum is quoted. I don't know where that necessarily comes from or why the 3 needs to be the minimum, but I would encourage us to think about E&D not in percentage terms, but in dollars, like what's needed, how many dollars are needed for the town or region to operate successfully? Because if we think about the budget, they have a $28 million budget. 24 million of it is salaries and benefits. So pretty much fixed expenses. Most of their budget is fixed expenses. They have $4 million of variable expenses. There's variation, could go up and down. It could be overshoot on that. So we have $1 million plus contingency reserve fund on what is really a $4 million variable operating budget. It's really like a 25% contingency. I mean, things have to go really sideways in 12 months for them to exhaust this budget, for them to exhaust this E&D fund. And fortunately, if things do go really sideways, they have the town of Sherborn and the town of Dover as financial backstops. So I really don't see the need for why this E&D fund needs to be over $1 million. It may not need to be zero, but I would certainly think it'd be closer to zero than $1 million plus, given what we're looking at from a dollar operating budget standpoint.
You all set then, Mike?
Yep.
I would just add to that, though, that I think E&D is an important tool, and we should have something like that in Sherborn. We've talked about, because every capital project you do, you have to do some engineering assessments up front in order to put enough information into a capital budget proposal. So you have to have what I call scoping estimates from contractors or designers and things like that. So having a little bit of a budget to do those kinds of things means that when you submit a capital project, it's better defined. And so that's why I think the excess deficiency allows you to, in 1 year, do the scoping study, and the following year have the cost of the actual project be on the warrant and be. And I agree with you about the timing. I'm not sure how this, fell in between 2 budget years, essentially, it sounds like, but the timing concern you raised makes sense. All right, Doug.
Hey there. I'm in my car. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, just building on Dan and Mike's points. It sounds like the school committee, unlike every other department in town, gets to squirrel away the money they don't spend every year into this fund. So I have a number of questions. I'll just ask them all and then let the select board comment. How big is the fund? How much has been put into it, let's say, every year over the last 5 years? I mean, does any other town department have a fund like this? And if so, if not, why not? Or if, why does the school committee get special treatment? The roof project clearly is massively over budget. And, okay, the scope change. Who decided to change the scope? This wasn't discussed at town meeting by anybody. It wasn't opined on by, I don't think, anybody on this call, was it? So did the school committee just decide to change the scope of the project, and why do they get to do that? This is a big capital project. It's basically what, a million, 2.2 million over 1.2 million approval, something like that. I guess the overarching question I have is, does the select board really want to cede this level of spending to the school committee? Isn't it our job, ours as the town and yours as the select board, to bring this before the citizens of the town? I think Dan and Mike were maybe a little more polite than I'd be about the timing. The school committee obviously knew they were going to spend this $1 million. And I'm outraged that 2 weeks after the town meeting, they just dropped this on the town. They knew. They should have told us. And I think we need to hold them accountable. It's ridiculous.
Well, I'm not sure we can answer too many of your questions, but the school is definitely legislatively authorized to have an excess and deficiency account. And
By us or the state?
every regional school district in the state, I believe, has a similar structure. We could research that, but so that's set up as how they're, when I was 6 years on advisory before my 6 years on select board. So an excess and deficiency account is standard practice for regional schools, as I'm told.
Is the size set by the state or something?
Yeah, 3 to 5% is the legal requirement. So they cannot go over 5%, essentially, of their annual budget. So if their E&D is over 5% of their budget, then all the excess has to be returned to the town.
Yeah.
How big is it right now?
It's well, right now it is, well, after what they've done here, I'm just looking at Jeremy's numbers here. It's at 772,000, which is 2.76%. Prior to that move, their certified E&D as of June 30th of last year was 1.126 million, which is 4.03%. And the maximum allowable is 1.44 million. That would be 5%.
Yeah, I don't think we can get
putting money in every year. Sorry, go ahead.
But I don't think we can get into the discussion of excess and deficiency legalities, and that's sort of beyond the select board's domain, but it is allowed by the state.
Well,
as
then
far
I'll
as
ask you a question.
other part of your question about,
sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Other departments in town aren't structured this way. Every operating budget can only spend up to the amount that was approved at town meeting for the operating budget, and we approve all capital projects, as you know, for town led projects, and the school similarly submits capital projects for the town to approve their share. I don't know. I can't comment on the timing of this. I don't know what caused there to be a. I would disagree in that they probably didn't sit on it and wait 3 months. I don't know what caused the delay, but I don't think we can discuss that either because we don't know the facts surrounding that. But you make good points, and I think it's supplemented. And I think what Dan's team is doing to, and hopefully in conjunction with Dover's, they call it Dover warrant, not the capital budget or advisory committee, that they can convince the school that we need to manage it a little bit better. So I think your points are certainly well taken, and I think advisory rather than the select board would take the lead on causing it to be a better management process.
Am I correct in assuming that nobody on this call opined on the change in scope?
I don't know that we reviewed it. It came up afterwards. I don't know, but they are allowed to manage their own capital projects, and this was I think it was a positive change in scope to go to air source heat pumps instead of using gas heat for the system. So, but I didn't.
Maybe not, but
And
it's
just
No,
so
I,
it's clear, the regional school committee is not a subcommittee of either of the towns. So the region is its own separate legal entity. It is separate from either the town of Sherborn or the town of Dover. It has its own budget. It plays by its own rules. The rules are set by the state, but they are an entirely separate legal entity. So
and
we
they
don't
can
have
have
we
their
don't
own
have command over them.
they have their own bonding capabilities. In some major school projects, they bonded it themselves. They can borrow at the regional level also. So I don't remember who's next, but I think Jeremy, why don't you weigh in because you have
Yeah, I just wanted to help answer that. There was a question as far as the how much money is put into or how money is put into the E&D fund. The E&D is like free cash for the general fund. So
Yep.
there's no budget annually that the schools put into it. It's by definition, it's the excess that they may have in their budget that they didn't expend in a particular year falls into the E&D fund. So sort of it's an accounting at the end of the year. If they have more assessments that they had granted or given to the communities and their expenses fell short of that, then that money goes into the E&D fund.
Yeah, I use the word retained earnings actually as a more logical phrase because, as we always say on advisory, free cash isn't free and it isn't cash. Uh, one of our many mantras. I think I remember who's next. Peter, you want to go ahead?
Thank you very much. Peter Moores, 45 Old Orchard Road. I just had a sort of a public observation and question for the select board. And I apologize if you're not read into this, but I had read the other day in the CMR, which talks about the regional school district budget. As it turns out, it's the section right before the section in the public packet. But it states that the regional school committee is supposed to take a vote on the budget. And the budget contains all proposed operating expenditures, capital expenditures, and debt service payments. So my read of that would be, and then the budget that they vote upon is supposed to be provided to the various local appropriating authorities. My read of that is that any project like the boiler project would have to be in their budget for capital expenditures and would have to be provided to the town for approval. And I don't know if that actually happened because I heard comments on this during this public meeting that things fall off and the town is not apprised of how the regional school committee is doing this capital expenditures. But according to the CMR, it has to be part of their budget, which is then provided to the town. So there should not be any falling off according to the CMR. And I don't know if that's not been followed by the regional school district.
I suspect, Peter, that what happened, because at least over the past 5 years, each time that they have used E&D for a capital project, it was on their capital budget at the beginning of the budget season. It does go before the capital budget committee, at least in the sort of initial version. And then at some point they decide we're going to use E&D to fund this. And then essentially where it falls off is that it falls off of the town's capital improvement plan, because since the region is using E&D for it, the town no longer needs to vote on approving either a borrowing or a free cash appropriation for that project. But I don't believe that there's ever been, at least that I'm aware of, there has not been a project over the past 5 years where it literally did not come before the town, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, again, my read of the CMR is that even if they're using their E&D for a capital expenditure, it gets incorporated within the budget, which then has to go to the local appropriating authority, which is the town. So to follow the CMR, things can't fall off. It has to remain, even if they're using E&D, it has to remain within their budget, which includes capital expenditures. So just an observation. Thank you very much.
I think it's a little bit inaccurate, though. I don't know enough about it, Peter, but I think there's, I'm not sure that the project fell off. They may have decided not to do the project for some other reason. I'm not sure what it was. It could even be the sustainability thing, but the HVAC rooftop units were approved by the town of Sherborn, just the scope changed. So they did bring that. I've worked with them quite a bit, and we generally have a pretty good working relationship, and they generally submit all the projects. So this seems to be kind of an exception rather than the rule, I guess, in my personal experience.
Oh, yeah, I was referring to the boiler because they
Yeah, I
use
don't
E
know.
and D. It shouldn't sort of fall off their budget plan.
Well, if they decide not to do the project, it should.
Agreed, but
I don't
in
know. I
their
don't think we know
approval
enough
process.
here to deliberate on that one. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I don't think I know I don't know enough, but I don't sure any of us have all the facts in my view. So Heidi, I think your hand was up next.
Okay, thank you. Heidi
Heidi,
Doyle,
by the
9.
way, is our former treasurer, so she's pretty knowledgeable about, because she was the one that pushed back on the HVAC air handling units and not taking out the borrowing in the year when they delayed the project. So that's.
I'm glad I did now.
Go ahead, Heidi.
Thank you. So Heidi Doyle, 9 Goulding Street East. I guess I'm kind of have a little bit of a concern. I know you said the town voted for this project, but I think the town voted for an amortized project. By voting a borrowing for it, the town was fully expected this project to be used over a period of years, and the spending on this HVAC was to go over a number of years, not just for
Yeah.
one lump sum payment.
It's not
So-
one lump sum, but it's not one lump sum. The lump sum was just for the change in scope to the project. The base project, I believe, is done still over that same period.
Right, but we are not borrowing any more money now.
I don't think that's the case, is it? I don't think that's true. I think we're borrowing because the scope went from whatever it was, 1.1 million to, I don't know the numbers, Dan, you can help me here, but 1.8 million or 1.9 million. The increase came partially from excess and deficiency, apart from this capital fund that resulted from the boilers, but the base amount that the town approved, I think we'll still borrow for.
Okay, so that's what I wanted, wasn't sure if they.
Am I stating that correctly, Dan?
So the project was approved for 1.2 million total. Sherborne's share
Yeah.
would have been roughly half. And
Yes,
we indicated the intention and the language in the advisory motion was for that, or the intention was that it would be financed with borrowing. For
right.
the 1.2. The excess is the 800,000 because the project is now scoped out at about 2 million,
Yeah.
of which our share would be about 400. And that's not being borrowed, which I think speaks to Heidi's point.
Okay, because
Well, what Heidi said, we're still borrowing what was the original approved project. Do you know
Okay,
what,
so-
Heidi, do I make sense?
Yes, no, so they still want our borrowing, plus they're gonna use the other.
Correct.
I guess I still feel that, I don't feel the school committee was given the full information. They did not get the option that they could borrow on their own. So even though I heard Don's explanation when I watched it, how, well, we didn't have time to go to town meeting, we wouldn't have been able to get the towns to approve or do anything. All the region needs is a school committee vote to borrow. They don't need any town authorization to borrow. That night, they could have voted to borrow and gone out and had that as an option. So I was just a little disheartened that that wasn't on the table as one of the options to be looked at, when I believe our town clearly indicated this was to be an amortized project. So I don't think the school committee was given that information as a potential option. Maybe after analyzing everything, this still would have been the best outcome, but I don't think that was ever presented.
Well, I'm
And
not, what are you saying, that you think the school committee should have borrowed themselves at the regional level for this gap?
if you're looking at a project that you're looking at $1 million, they did have the authority as well to borrow. I mean, we were going to borrow 500 something. They could have borrowed $1 million and done an assessment to us, which has been done before, and have it amortized over so many years.
Yeah,
But it was an option that wasn't presented. And
yeah. Well, I don't think any of us here tonight can comment on the timing. We don't know what they knew and what they knew when. So I would only hesitate to say that we shouldn't speculate, in my view.
No, but I would love advisory as someone to bring up to the school if they're going to be meeting with Dover Warrant to say, hey, can anyone, let's bring up borrowing again, that they have the ability to borrow, and going forward, have that be options.
Can I make a comment on that?
I'll let Paul, do you want to clarify that?
Yes, if the region borrows, it's not a borrowing by the town. It's not exempt from the limits of Proposition 2.5. It becomes an additional assessment on the town that is within the levy limit.
Right.
What we tried to do with the IMAs, the whole point of the IMAs, and the point that we years ago we tried to discourage the regional borrowing, so that if there was going to be borrowing, the town would do the borrowing, and we would have a debt exclusion, so our voters could have the option of either declining the project or exempting it from Prop 2.5 in order to save our budget. But if the region does the borrowing, we cannot do a debt exclusion because it's not our borrowing. And so we're stuck with doing that within the levy limit. That was my only comment. They can borrow the money. Yes, you're absolutely correct on that.
Yeah, no, and I know there's been a movement also to look at not doing debt exclusion. So it's just, I'd like to have had as an option. I never heard it mentioned in that meeting that I watched, that was ever even a consideration. So I'm hoping that it gets put on the table somewhere, that people remember there's another a tool to look at here.
No, I think advisory will do that with the letter that Dan's doing in the meeting they're going to have next week. I think that gets.
And that speaks to the timely notification in that, and I don't know the timing either, but conceivably, if information had been communicated sooner, there might have been an opportunity to consider more alternatives. May have ended up in the same place, but could have considered additional alternatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think Sean's point is here that using E&D left the funding within the levy limit also. In a way, it was tax dollars. So just, there's many more variables, and I think that this decision was a little rushed. That's all. Thank you.
So like I said, we shouldn't speculate. Let advisory figure that out. Nora.
Yeah, I don't have a problem speculating or questioning, because I think it in a sense means the same thing, but I just want to reflect back on how I feel about the boiler. So if it came before, if something like, say, hey, Sean's on there, that Sean came to something with the DPW and said, I need this. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, I don't need this. It's very frustrating to see. And I just want to know why they needed it, the boiler. And then how did it get determined, or what were the reasons how it got then said, oh no, it actually is good for 10 years. I have a real question about that. So, and that's what I feel is frustrating on advisory and also as a taxpayer. That's all. And I just want to understand like how that happens.
Well, you have to ask them that. We can't help you there.
I'm just putting it out there because I'm frustrated.
Projects change a lot, though. It could very well be this whole sustainability thing. They decided maybe go away from gas altogether. So I think.
But a little bit more of an explanation, I think, would be.
Well, I don't know. Like I said, that's why I call it speculation. But we can follow up. Dan, I think, is the appropriate, and advisory the appropriate follow up in my view. Mike, you have another point?
Yeah, just two things. Well, one, we wouldn't have to speculate if this went through the capital budgeting process. And second, there was mention at the meeting that there was a 45 days. The town had 45 days to veto or no vote or whatever it was on this. Is that, I don't know where that came from or why that was said. Is that true? And what needs to happen for that? There was early discussion that we have like no recourse here, but there was mention of this 45-day window.
I think Dan can answer that.
Dan, you want to answer that?
I know Jeremy can answer it as well, but Dan's got his hand up.
Yeah, Jeremy can jump in too. So there, we did a little bit of investigating on that point, and I think Jeremy consulted with town council as well. And the 45-day opportunity for the town to disapprove a decision of the RSC is if they do something that changes the town's assessment, then the town has 45 days to disapprove that. But that disapproval comes back to the authority that approved the budget, the school's budget, and that would be town meeting. So that 45-day disapproval would require having a special town meeting. So one, it doesn't apply here, I think, because their use of E&D doesn't change the town's assessment. So it doesn't apply. And even if it did apply, practically for an issue like this, the town is not going to call us. I would be very surprised if the select board would choose to call a special town meeting over an issue like this. So effectively, for these kinds of issues, there really isn't a 45-day disapproval option.
And Jackie's not here, but town meetings are not cheap. I don't know what they are, $70,000 or something to run a town meeting. Particularly if you had to vote, have a public vote afterward, then they're very expensive. If it was
So just so I understand, so the select board or advisory, no one has any, besides writing a letter and.
I haven't recognized anyone to speak. Did you speak? Are you speaking again, Mike?
I'm just responding to Dan's comment. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
well,
all
I'm
right.
chairing the meeting here, not Dan.
I can raise my hand again.
Go ahead. Well, I didn't know who was even speaking because your hand wasn't up.
Sorry. I was just to Dan's comment. I mean, in terms of, there's no recourse for the town for anything. I mean, besides writing a letter and making comments here or at the advisory budgeting process, there's zero recourse the town, anyone here has to change this at all. Do I understand that right?
Can I respond to that?
Paul can respond, but I think we also remember that Jeremy reached out to town council also, but Paul's town council for a number of other towns. So go ahead, Paul.
So I want to raise the 45 days, and the 45 days in my head, what I was thinking was that the 350 was not E&D, but was part of an IMA. And the IMA provides that if the money's not spent, it reverts to the town. So this was the town's money. And because they were applying it, they in effect were increasing our assessment by that amount of money, because otherwise we're entitled to it to be returned. One, we could have sued them for the money, but B, the easy way is you call a town meeting within 45 days and basically say, no, don't use the 350,000. But the reason why I withdrew the objection on the 45-day business is because they're not using town of Sherborn money, if you will, the reverse to the town of Sherborn. They're using the E&D, which they have unless it's over 5%, which it is not over 5%. And in any event, we're going to have to fund the project anyway. And if we forced the hand and said you can't use the 350, they could do something like borrow the money and just send us the bill, and we were going to have to pay it. So it's the project's going to get done. It becomes impractical, as I think Jeff has pointed out, to pursue a remedy. I'll end it at that.
All right, thank you.
But that's
Peter,
the background behind the 45 days.
yeah, and I think Jeremy, did you talk to Chris Petrini's firm, to our town council too, didn't you?
Yeah, that's correct. And Dan summarized that, those findings well.
Yep. Peter.
Yeah, Peter Moore's 45 Old Orchard. I'm not town council, but it does say in the CMR for section 5 amendments to approved budgets, which is what the regional school committee has done. If such amendment results in an increase in the total amount of the budget or an increase in the assessment of any number, it has to be sent over to the local appropriating authority for their vote. They can vote within 45 days to disapprove it. So this, I think, is an increase to the total budget. So it would be up to Sherborn and Dover if they wanted to reject it to vote within 45 days. That's just my read as non-town council.
Well, I think Paul just answered that, why that's not applicable. Doug.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, but the elephant in the room is who decided to change the scope by what sounds like about $1 million. And Why did they change it? Is it a good idea? Does anyone on this call have any ability to opine on the change in scope? What if they decided to change the scope by $2 million, or I'm just going to say for really stupid reasons? Like, are we opining on the change in scope in any way, shape, or form? Whose decision was this?
Well, see, the problem, Doug, is what the agenda item is the use of the excess and deficiency fund. The project actually isn't on tonight's agenda for the select board. And that's really in the domain of in my view, of the regional school committee, as pointed out earlier. We're just discussing the funding via excess and deficiency use.
Well, then it just it presents a structural challenge in the governance of the town, in that the school committee can unilaterally decide to spend this money on whatever the hell they want, and we don't really have any ability to say anything about it. It sounds like. Am I misunderstanding?
You're misstating it, I would say. You're not necessarily misunderstanding. Paul, do you want to help me clarify this?
Yes, I think what's missing here is the fact that essentially the regional schools is not the town of Sherborn. You got to look at it as if that's an entirely different organization. It is not the town of Sherborn. There is a regional school committee. The regional school committee is elected. So when you ask who makes the decision, it's the elected representatives that you elect, we all elect, who serve on the regional school committee.
Did the original $1.2 million appropriation get voted on at the Sherborn town meeting or not?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so this is my point. It's a project that was put before the town, and the good town folks of Sherborn and Dover said, yes, this sounds like a good idea. But the school committee is unilaterally doubling roughly the cost of it. They could be quintupling the cost of it. It's no longer our project. It's their project. This is my point. If we gave them approval for a $50,000 project and they wanted to add $1 million to a $50,000 project, they could, it sounds like.
As long as they didn't increase our assessment.
You're taking us down the speculation road again.
No, it's not. I'm just talking about the issue is governance. Okay, I'm not talking about.
It really isn't the issue. They've asked us to borrow. They had the funding to fund this. Oh, it's not really an overrun. The project changed in scope for, I believe, good reasons, and it's within the regional school committee's authorization as elected officials for that entity to handle that. They have to come to the town if they need additional funding from the town, but they don't.
Okay, maybe we take it offline, but I would like to hear what the good reason is. It hasn't been articulated other than the word sustainability, which could mean anything.
Well, I'm not going to go there because I'm not knowledgeable, but also the project that we approved was 2.5 years ago. So you have a lot of construction experience. So what have you seen in construction costs in the last 30 months? So there's a lot of reasons. And they also eliminated using natural gas and went to air source heat pumps. So I'm quite confident, and I have a construction background also, that there are solid reasons, but I don't know what they are, because that wasn't the scope.
Respectfully, now you're speculating. Respectfully, so
no, I'm not. I know these are facts because I've talked to some people about it, but we're beyond the scope of the select board agenda, which was excess and deficiency. Jeremy.
Yeah, not to speak for the regional school committee or school finance, but there is a memo that was presented to the regional school committee from school finance that's in your packet that does summarize, gives some detail as far as the justification for the project. Just wanted to point folks in that direction. It might offer a little more context.
And also just, I think I've said this previously in the meeting, but ultimately to answer Doug's high level question of can the school committee just unilaterally choose to do this? The answer is actually yes, because they're choosing to do it with their excess and deficiency, which they have complete control over. And so long as their use is an allowed use of E&D, yes, they can do it, because they are not increasing their assessment to the town by doing it. and it's frustrating, and I understand that. And I'll tell you that it is frustrating every year for advisory when they're asking the schools to try to use their E&D in a different way, in such a way that more money comes back to the town so that we can reduce our tax assessment, our tax levy. And they choose not to because that's within their right. And it's frustrating and annoying.
Thanks for that explanation.
Okay, thanks for your input. All right. We're pretty good at beating dead horses too here, I think, tonight, but I appreciate all the input. And I think, I think your next move, Dan, and hopefully with the collaboration with Dover Warrant, will get at not only the content of tonight's discussion, but the sort of tenor and concern about process as well. So thanks for taking the lead on that.
We'll get going next week.
All right. Well, stay tuned, huh? So I think we've covered this item. There's nothing to vote on tonight. So I then suggest we move on to the next agenda item, which is the much less colorful consent agenda. Paul, you're good at these motions.
Move approval.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Stephen.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Marion.
Aye.
And I am I as well. Thank you, everyone. Next up is select board reports. Any select board reports?
Just a comment I could
Go ahead.
about Memorial Day.
Yes.
Jeff was present, and the police were present, and the fire department was present, and there was many Boy Scouts in attendance and Girl Scouts and public watching the parade. Good speeches all around, well organized by our veterans agent Diana Hook, and a good time was had by all, including ice cream at the end of the day.
And the rain wasn't present, fortunately, also, but it was close. But it was
a good community event. Thank you for attending.
A very good event, very, very overall good community event. So I think I agree with you on that. And Stephen, I talked about earlier, and you're doing the commencement address this Thursday. Make a good speech, and if it's rainy, make sure you give me your speech so I don't have to create one for Friday night. All right.
I'll try. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say in 2 to 4 minutes, but
I'll be your ghost speaker.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's Marion or Paul or any other select board reports? All right, Jeremy, do you want to do your town administrator report?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, just a few updates and reports for the board. I wanted to give an update on the status of the North Sherborn Water and Sewer District and the latest there. As you know, special legislation has been filed at the State's House. And that's House Bill 4627. That did go to the Secretary of State's office as required, and we did the legal posting in the newspaper that was required and have fed back that posting through Representative Lorena DeRosa's office, and hopefully now that'll go on from the next step from the Secretary of State's office and continue on towards approval. We have re-engaged the town of Natick to discuss sanitary sewer connection for that district. We've had a good initial re-engagement meeting with them, and then we have a follow-up meeting scheduled in mid-June. And actually, since that original meeting with Natick, we've gotten some more information, more clarity from Natick Town Council that any intermunicipal agreement with the town of Natick that's 25 years or less in term would not require the approval of Natick's town meeting. It would be in the realm of the select board. So that was deemed as favorable in the current discussion. So
we could make it be a 25-year term or 24-year term or whatever.
We can, yeah, we can make it that we can go up to Marion, correct me if I'm wrong, was it up to 30 years or up to 50 years? But we can do anything less.
It's up to 50, but we will choose to do 25.
I got it.
And yeah.
And we could supplement it later or at a subsequent Natick town meeting, they could
Yeah, if we can renew it after 25 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't be we, but some other we will be renewed in 25 years. Yes, I agree.
Paul will at least.
Yeah. Stephen might be involved.
I should disclose that I am representing the town of Natick in some matters, so I am not participating in this discussion, even though I'm physically here.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
I should add, oh, sorry, Jeremy, I was gonna
go
just
ahead, Marianne.
to the water district, at meetings, this morning, Arena DeRosa's aide told me that it had been released from the Secretary of State's office and now is on its way to the committee that it needs to go to. And he seemed to feel confident that it would get through this current legislative session, but we shall see.
But it has to go to the Senate afterwards, right? That's still within the state house, the House.
Yep.
Massachusetts House, so it would still have to go to Rebecca's domain.
That's correct. Yeah, and then make it to the governor's desk.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have a comment on that specifically, Dan, or should we let Jeremy finish his summary?
So I think some advisory members are hoping to get off the call, so just wondered if we.
Oh, no, I forgot to let you close your meeting. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, all good. Just, early bedtimes, whatever. So on advisory, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Okay, and then quick roll call, Nora.
Aye.
Penn.
Aye.
Mike Winters.
Aye.
Mike Flanagan.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. So we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Guys, and thanks for taking the lead on this issue next week. We really appreciate it. All right, you're back, Jeremy.
I'm back. Yes. So further updates on Washington and Maple Street, the reconstruction there. The contractor has gotten a significant amount of the underground stormwater drainage done. They're making some pipe connections now and doing a lot of the backfilling. So they've made a lot of progress in the field in the lawn in front of Town Hall and the library. And we'll get that cleaned up shortly and back to grade. They've also done some excavation of where sidewalks will be outside of the roadway area, not affecting traffic. And have installed a number of the detour signs around town and put sort of covering on them. So when June 17th comes, when the detour will be in place and the roadway shut down, they'll just pull the covers off and the detours will be in place. So just a reminder that, June 17th is when the detours will be in effect and traffic will be detoured around the construction area. And it's planned that the construction will be completed and the roadways reopened.
You leave the meeting?
Mid-August, this August.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Just a comment, if I could.
Yep.
People have been asking me about these mystery detour signs because they're driving along and suddenly they see these detour signs. They're not covered. They're visible, or maybe they once were covered and the covers blew off. And I myself didn't have an answer. I thought it was somehow related to the roundabout, but they're not at the roundabout. They're at various locations away from the roundabout. So thank you for that explanation. And thank you for telling the citizens of the town why there are these mystery detour signs. So it's not a road race. It's not the Boston Marathon. It's not any of those things that people are asking about. It's an anticipation of June 17th.
Correct.
Thank you for that.
And they should be covered. And, Sean and I can confirm that tomorrow, but, the contractor will put them up so they're ready to go and then cover them to minimize confusion. If they didn't cover or the covers came off, we'll make sure that happens so that, confusion is minimized. But it's all related to the construction at Washington and Maple Street.
Yep.
There is some additional work that the contractor will be starting next week. Same contractor, not part of the Washington Maple Street, but there was some additional complete streets funding that the town has for sidewalk work. And the contractor will begin work on completing a section of sidewalk on South Main Street from Farm Road north to Dunkin' Donuts. It goes along the frontage of Pilgrim Church to complete that section of sidewalk. Those are some complete streets funding funds that we have from the Commonwealth to complete that section of sidewalk. And we'll also be able to, at a similar time, replace the crossing signal that's there. There's a pedestrian crossing signal that's been malfunctioning, not working well. Sean has procured a new one, and we'll have that kind of swapped out in that same location, but something more operative. Sean, anything more to add on those two projects? Make sure I'm.
No, I think you summed it up. Back to the detours though. One of two things happened. People are actually literally driving by as they're installing a detour sign, and they're semi-permanent signs, so they stick out. There's also a fair amount of work going on Farm Road. So, people sometimes drive down Farm Road right now, and then Eversource and the Sherborn police close the road. So there's, that end of Farm Road is somewhat in the vicinity of the work going on, and that may be confusing to some, somewhat unrelated, but there's a fair amount of detour signs that way too, kind of around Farm Pond.
Thanks, Sean. And Sean and I actually went to a PFAS summit this morning. It was hosted by Congressman Auchincloss at Boston College. It was pretty informative. It was basically a summary of the rollout of how the US EPA is going to implement their PFAS standards for drinking water. If you'll recall, they're reducing or setting a national drinking water standard of 4 parts per trillion, which is less than the current Massachusetts level. But it was informative and also gave some time frame of when the EPA is going to implement this and how the Commonwealth will need to comply. It's going to be a 5-year implementation schedule from the point when they promulgated the rules. So that's 2029 when those new federal standards for PFAS will be in effect and enforced and be sort of the rules of the game. The federal government has put forward $1 billion over 5 years to help with providing treatment funds for communities and water utilities. That includes, unlike prior funding, federal funding for drinking water improvements, this current funding actually does include and will allow those funds to be used for private wells. So some more to come on that. And actually, the Commonwealth has received $19 million from the federal government that is going to be solely dedicated to private drinking water wells. So we're not sure how that will be accessed, but it's good news that there is some funding available for the private wells that are affected by PFAS. And there is a state grant that we're tracking closely, which we're optimistic will help cover the cost of the PFAS treatment at the town campus. There's a $32 million available for Massachusetts emerging contaminants in small and disadvantaged communities. Sherborn classifies as a small community, so we're hopeful that we'll be a recipient of that grant in the future to help implement the treatment that's required at the town campus. And I guess my last update is some staffing updates. Unfortunately, the conservation administrator candidate that we extended an offer to declined, and she accepted a position in another community. So we're sort of back to the drawing board again there. We'll repost. One thing that we did do in that offer to make it more competitive was to include some sustainability time in that. As you recall, the conservation agent is actually funded at 35 hours per week. So we included some additional funds of 5 hours of sustainability time to make the salary more competitive and actually the position more intriguing to the candidate. And that did have the desired effect. Unfortunately, they did accept another position, but I think when we re-advertise, I've been talking with the co-chairs of the Conservation Commission, we may formally update that job advertisement to include those sustainability time. Related to that, the sustainability coordinator shared position with Holliston is ongoing. Unfortunately, Holliston is tied up a bit right now with some special town meetings and budgets and an override situation. So Travis has said that his focus is elsewhere right now. So we're not able to make more progress right now on that shared position with this, with Holliston for the sustainability coordinator, but that's still on the table. We've advertised to fill Sue's position once she retires as the Council on Aging Director, and have gotten some applications in. I've reached out to the chair and vice chair of the Council on Aging to have them participate in a search and selection process and an interview process. So that is moving forward. Lastly, related to staffing and actually special legislation moving through the State House, we received word today that the governor signed the special legislation that allowed the combination of the treasurer collector position for the town of Sherborn. So that is now officially the position, and we're allowed to do that. And that's actually what we had built into the FY25 budget. So things have fallen into place there, and it shows things can move pretty quickly at the State House. So optimistic that'll be the same way for the water and sewer districts. Thanks, Jeff.
Sounds good. Pam, you're on the hook now. That sounds good. And I think I went down with Diane today and I met our new Board of Health Administrator, Jessica. So she seemed terrific as well. Has quite a good background, both from, if I recall, I think Westwood and Needham. So she was really a strong candidate.
Yeah,
So
great addition to the team.
Did a great job, and that was actually very difficult to fill Ellen's shoes. So that was terrific. Go ahead, Marion.
Yeah, I was looking for my raised hand, but I'll just go ahead. Speaking of recruiting for the Conservation Commission, or we've successfully recruited for Select Board, for planning, for Board of Health. It struck me the other day when I went down to talk with Heidi, I think it was, in the office down there, that if I were a candidate, I might be a little put off by the the current state of the office. And I'm just wondering if anything could be done. I know Sean has worked very hard on this, and we only have so much room in town hall, but there is a lot of sort of moving of stored stuff out of their working space that would make that a much more desirable looking space to work in, let's say, for a candidate. So maybe Jeremy, do you know if anything can be done in the short term?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Marion. I'm not sure if you've been down in the land use offices recently, but with Jessica's arrival, there's been a lot of reorganization and cleanup there. With her coming on board and organizing and organizing some of the Board of Health files. And we're moving forward with also cleaning out the old Council on Aging space to make some office space there. We're optimistic that room could seat 3 or 4 individuals in some office space. One of those likely dedicated to the recreation coordinator, Dave Welch, finding a home here in Town Hall, or there in Town Hall. So there's been a lot of movement recently, Marion, on that, and the eventual plan is to have a formal built-in counter in the land use office, and more of a formalized space for customers to come in, and a lot more professional looking. We did have, just before Jessica's arrival, we found an odor that had been eluding us for some time. There was a sewer pipe that had some cracks in it that Sean identified finally after some months of searching, and there was some construction that we scrambled to get done before she arrived, but that's now put back together. But yeah, thank you, Mary.
I was there
We're
about
hopefully moving forward to make a better space for all.
Great.
Yeah, it's actually way better today than it was several months ago, I think. I commented on that to Diane as we walked by, particularly that former COA office. That used to be kind of everything that was in the vault that we took out of the vault to put somewhere else.
Yeah, I was there a week ago, and Jessica had just arrived, and
yeah,
I think, well, Yeah, I know that you're working hard on it and it's
Thanks,
hard to
Brian.
find space for everything.
Okay. Well, I would like to see if Paul wants to make a motion.
Yes, move to adjourn.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Stephen,
Aye.
Paul,
I'll vote no. That Eric
you're
Johnson,
going to
no.
be the Chuck Young vote. Marion,
Chuck, yeah, no.
Aye, sure.
I'll be aye as well. We can't have a 2-2 vote here. So, good night, everyone, and thanks for a great meeting. Well planned and well discussed. Thank you.
Good night.